I don't know how to follow my own advice. And that might be a good thing? I can't tell. But that's going to be the general sentiment of this whole video. Speaking of, the purpose of this video is to reflect on my experience developing a game during the Devtober Game Jam. And this time I have way more to talk about than usual. I hope to give you an overview of the whole process, so if you're just looking to check out what we made, watch my previous video, or go play it with the link in the description. Otherwise, I'm sort of compacting all my devlogs and Postmortem into one, and if that's what you want, keep watching. Every year, for a few years now, I've been participating in this month-long game jam called Devtober, where the goal is to just work on your game every day during October. The spirit of this game jam is a bit different from traditional ones, where there are no real requirements beyond what you set for yourself. The idea is to encourage healthy and productive habits for those who want to make games. Each year so far, I've followed this mindset and accomplished my goals. It's worked great, but this year I decided I needed to do something a bit different. I wanted to have another try at working in a group, aiming for that mythical good experience I hear people talk about in their game jams. After a lot of typing goals, plans, and options, what I came up with was to make a sort of clone of a relatively simple arcade game, but with all original assets and some slight tweaks to give it our own spin. If you have ever played Puyo Puyo, or Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine, or Kirby's Avalanche, you will probably notice the similarities. However, I'm fine with that because the goal was to learn how to make games in Godot, not to make an original breakout indie hit. So here we are a month later, and a lot happened. First, I want to tackle what didn't work, and that kinda depends on your perspective. Overall, I accomplished my goals, and the result exceeded my expectations. So it could be hard to say anything didn't work, but if I focus on the experience, it could have been better, or at least easier. After rewatching my own videos for previous Devtober postmortems, it seems like I wanted to prove myself wrong or something, because I ended up doing the opposite of what I used to do in a lot of ways. I told myself I would limit my time and keep it sustainable, but more times than not, I would end up working more than I knew I should. It ended up working this time, but there's no way the daily routine I had this month was sustainable. In fact, toward the end of this game jam, I had the most drastic change in attitude, and it was completely unexpected. I was feeling great, and then I was not. I can't imagine it's unrelated to the goal I set, forcing me into some type of crunch, even if I didn't realize I was doing it. I don't know if it was imposter syndrome or what, but without focusing too much on the negative details, suffice it to say it wasn't fun. I ended up barely making any game progress for 2 days in a row because of it, so it doesn't even make sense from an efficiency standpoint. Oh man, what a revolutionary concept. Crunches suck. I was able to keep some daily progress and recover only because I realized I can learn from this too. I made a mistake and learned more about what to avoid, and that's a valuable lesson. With that out of the way, everything else went pretty great. If this month taught me anything above all else, it's that sometimes what you thought you learned or figured out based off of previous experiences may not actually be true. I'll try to minimize the never give up speech, but to put it in more specific context, I was pretty convinced group projects would never work out for me. But when the right conditions all aligned, I actually accomplished that goal for once. It's hard to describe how this changed my perspective on so many other things. But it's great. Would recommend. As I mentioned, in the past I had a 3-hour limit to work, and I still tried to keep that limit in mind, and it did help stop myself from doing too much some days. But when the goal that's exceeding your expectations seems like it's within reach, it's far too easy to break that rule. But when I did limit, it worked great, so yeah, don't overwork. I think the real game changer for me this year, especially with the group project, is all the planning and decision making I made ahead of time. It's a lot of work, and I used to assume others wanted to be more involved in the earlier parts of the creative process, but with groups, I think it helps to lay out the game design as much as possible. I feel like the project I chose was just right for what I was looking to learn. The scope was just big enough to have a vertical slice ready in a month, so I was able to try out every step of creating a game and get a feel for the entire workflow and everything required. The choice to make the core gameplay a clone of something simple and fun really helps focus on so many important things about game design that could easily be ignored otherwise. There's no way I would have had the same great experience if I didn't end up with the group I had, and I'm very grateful for their involvement. Each person had their own role and yet was able to contribute in other areas when they wanted to. We all communicated well, and that helped not only in productivity, but I think it provided a lot of social elements I was lacking in previous years. And with all that said, now I gotta think about how I would do this whole thing differently when I do it again. This used to be an easy section for me, but this year there's a lot of things to think about. First and foremost, now that I have a little bit larger of an array of experiences both group and solo, I'm trying to decide which approach works best for me dedicating a month of my time to. Honestly, it's a tough choice, and I didn't expect it to be. On one hand, I achieved way more in a group than I did solo. On the other hand, when it was just me, I was much better at keeping a good life balance and sticking to my own rules. The way that I prefer to look at it is that this opened up a new option for me, which I wouldn't have considered in the past. I'll just have to weigh my options when it comes time in the future. Regardless of who I end up doing a project with in the future, I think more plans will only help. I did a lot of planning this year, and every bit of planning I did was useful. And even still, I feel like I didn't do enough. There were a lot of little questions that came up that I wasn't really prepared for. And while I enjoy figuring that out as a group, I felt like that might not have been the experience others are looking for. When focusing on a specific deadline, like getting a game done in a month, this is especially true, because it's more time spent planning which could have been spent working on anything else that might have been more beneficial. Overall, this Devtober experience was great. I accomplished all my goals and then some. I worked every day on my project, Godot is way more familiar to me now, and I learned a lot, not just in code and engine specifics, but skills to actually make assets for games, design skills, and especially how group dynamics can work. Honestly, it's kinda surreal that a game that was just a sketch and a lot of notes is now playable. It's so close to what I envisioned at the start and yet different in a lot of good ways. Sure, I could be setting my expectations too low in the first place. Sure, it's just a clone and there may be no reason to play it over the original inspirations. But all things considered, it's hard not to look back at this month and think positively. All that remains now is what to do from here. I'd like to hear what you want to see. We could implement some of the ideas we had during development, like experiment with different gameplay loops and adding a dialogue system for jokes and story elements, and a bunch more characters and all that kinds of stuff. Or we do have a 3D model of T of E rigged and ready to go, and the group seems very interested in the 3D platformer genre. It might take much longer, but we have no shortage of ideas and willpower to probably make that work. Please let me know what you'd rather see more of, or just feel free to follow along. I'm gonna take a little break from game dev for a bit, but for now, thanks and bye.